I often describe the proponents of this wildly crazy free marketism as free market fundamentalists. And we've got one on the hook today in Conservative Home. Now, we're not going to bother reading his article because, to be honest, as we're going to point out in a bit, it is absolutely pure nonsense. And if we actually did this, would have wild and wacky consequences that this guy would just refuse to accept and just say, oh no, actually, that's just a whole part of, competition. That's just the free markets working. So, if UK companies go bankrupt or can't really compete in this new world where all these cheap imports are flooding into the UK and they literally cannot compete against them, well, that just means they weren't a successful company and deserved to die. That is the genuine opinion of these free market fundamentalists. And I call them free market fundamentalists. They would say that they're more free marketeers, but I would say that the fundamentalist aspect certainly applies to these people completely and 100%. So, first of all, what is a free market? What is a free marketeer before we add the fundamentalist part? Well, someone who is a free marketeer will say that they believe in free trade. That should always be your first alarm bell, that they believe in free trade. In reality, when you question them more, they go a lot further. They start saying things like, well, we don't really want any type of regulation at all, because they think that the government should not be involved in regulating of any kind of markets whatsoever. The government should just get out of the way and let the markets just run wild. That would be an absolute disaster. And this goes along with the protection of many things like workers' rights and, of course, consumer protection. So if you bought a faulty good, well, that's on you for not doing your proper research. Doesn't matter that there was, not maybe it wasn't labeled correctly, or you found out that when you buy a certain product that there were products in there that you weren't maybe expecting. This, just the full idea that these people think that their crazy worldview would work is why we call them free market fundamentalists, because they are obsessed with this idea, even though history has shown that their free market fundamentalism would be an absolute pure disaster. Now, all this comes back from the Austrian School of Economics, a economic school of thought that isn't even popular in Austria anymore, the country in which it was founded. Founded back in sort of the late 1800s. And it comes from this idea that this Austrian economist saw how in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the nobility of Hungary were absolutely becoming hugely wealthy, because they were not, had a lot of, shall we say, special exemptions, mostly because, well, they had the vast majority of the army on their side, and they had used a lot of their political power throughout the years, and even militarily so, to maintain these rights that they had. They pretty much had to pay next to no taxes and follow none of the rules and regulations, but they were becoming incredibly wealthy. So this entire economic school of thought is based on a incredibly privileged few that managed to get these rules through military strength and political coercion. Yeah, fantastic thing to build an entire economic school of thought on, guys. But this school of thought at the time initially was sort of relatively popular, and Britain decided itself was going to take on these rules. And we've talked about how before this whole thing was taken on, even championed at that time by Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, as a way to unleash the true economic power of the UK. And they got their way. They had the whole, Alexandra Palace with the first ever sort of World's Fair. That was there as a proof of justification that their cause would be right. And they succeeded. They conned everyone into thinking that their ideas would work. And even at the time, there were numerous people in economics saying, well, actually, this whole economic idea of Austrian economics is fundamentally flawed, as we just explained. And of course, they went on and they did it. And Britain carried out this experiment for about 6 years before everything got reversed. And from that point on, the whole Austrian school of economics has been thoroughly discredited. No country really ever follows through on these crazy economic ideas. But this idea set has followed because it has been very popular. Because if you're, shall we say, extremely wealthy, this is sort of actually quite popular. This is why you see a lot of very rich people put into things like the Legatum Institute, which is where this guy is writing from, who professes that, oh, well, recently in the UK we've had to accept the EU's kite mark, or the EU safety mark, and we've talked about that before. But his new crazy idea is that actually this is a massive opportunity. Now that we've accepted the EU safety standards and we have to follow those EU safety standards, instead, we should now just say, you know what, let's accept everyone's safety standards, regardless of the fact that they might be lower than ours. And he uses, of course, the CPTPP, or the Pacific Partnership, as we'll just call it for ease, as an example. And we've always described what the Pacific Partnership versus what the EU single market was. The single market was, this is the standard line. Everyone works from that level upwards. So you can go this far and no lower. But you can go up if you want to, but you can't go lower. Now, in the Pacific Partnership, that is not the case. The Pacific Partnership, of what we talked about before, is mutual recognition of standards, even if those standards are lower than what your current regulations are in your country. And you have to accept those goods because you're in the Pacific Partnership, my friend. This is what we are signing up to. And we've talked about the consequences of what is going to be coming of joining this particular trade deal, or this trade grouping in this case. And yet he goes on to say that we should accept the Pacific Partnership kite mark. Well, there is no such thing as a Pacific Partnership kite mark, because all these countries have wildly different standards. Wildly different standards. So the fact that they've all each got their own individual kite mark, and this is why the Pacific Partnership was set up, because, you know, well, Japan might have higher standards than, say, Malaysia or Brunei. Well, Japan now has to accept those products. It doesn't matter that Japan's got higher standards. Same for us now that we've sort of joined this. And of course, we've talked about the consequences, what this is going to be for food, for a ton of different products. And of course, there are consequences if we decide to actually use our sovereignty to block those products from coming into our country because they don't meet our standards. It will be a lot of fines, and our government will have to fight in court to try and maintain our own standards. And if say we should lose these standards, we lose one, remember, and in this court, in the Pacific Partnership Court, if you lose, your government then has to lower those standards to meet the standards that you lost to. And if your government refuses, then guess what? Another company can come along and sue you and automatically win. So this just goes on and on and on and on and on. And that's why the Pacific Partnership is absolutely awful and terrible for this. And he even thinks that, oh, if we start accepting, other people's standards, then they'll accept ours instantly. But why? Why should any country just automatically accept the standards of the UK? It doesn't have to. And not only that, what if they then decide to accept higher standards than us currently? Can they now automatically block UK products under the UK kite mark? This is what we always describe these free market fundamentalists are. They have this ideology that they cannot veer from because they are ideologically focused on it. And this is why I always describe them as free market fundamentalists, because they cannot see the reality of their ideas, even though there are other economists that tell them very clearly, if you do this, this will have consequences. And of course, their response is, oh no, that won't be the case at all. Meanwhile, of course, the closest we have ever come that I like to remind people of having a prime minister who employed these ideas was, of course, Liz Truss, who crashed our economy, almost destroyed the UK pensions industry. And because of how invested our UK pension industry is in our economy, if that had happened, that would have had catastrophic consequences. And if you think things are bad now, things could have been much, much worse if the Bank of England hadn't stepped in. And remember, people like this guy who wrote this article do not think the Bank of England should have stepped in. Because as far as he is concerned, if those pension companies had collapsed and all those other companies had collapsed as well, they deserved it. And all the economic calamity that came with it, well, that's just the market doing what it should do. And that's why these people are incredibly dangerous and should be allowed nowhere near the wheel of government ever. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.